Okay. No more cold?
Pretty much gone. Still
Okay.
feels a little strange, but yeah, my voice is mostly back.
Right.
Thank God.
As long as all the windows are in place. I know you're not practicing too much.
No, I should practice more. Being a singer is pretty intensive in the practice. It's not, it's like being a Jew. I mean, if you don't pray and you don't learn, you're not gonna grow. So.
Still Jewish
Huh?
though. Still Jewish.
Still a singer?
Not really, though. No, it doesn't. It's not even that. See, if you don't practice, like you won't even.
You just lose your skill.
You actually do. Yeah. But if you don't grow in your Jewishness, you're degrading in your Jewishness. You're going backwards, aren't you? I mean,
Yeah, but Abraham is saying that essentially you still remain a Jew. What's the story? This is it?
No, there's another 3 guys.
Are they coming? That's my question.
Yeah, but
Are they okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we start?
Sure.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a cold, so you'll excuse me. As we've been doing lately, is we actually base our discussion on the current parsha, but we emphasize and we focus in on something that is pertinent to us here. The parsha of the week, is Lech Lecha. There's a sikha from the Rebbe. The Rebbe asks an interesting question. But he says that the first mention in the Torah that Hashem recognizes Avram as anything special, that Avram was a man of a special quality, is the first mention right here where Hashem said to Avram, you should leave your land. There's no mention anyplace else before to prepare us. Like by Noach, it says first, Noach was a tzaddik. Noach, Hashem was pleased with Noach. Something about Noach as being a good person. And then it says Hashem spoke to Noach and told him such and such. By Avram, there is no introduction whatsoever to Avram, except when Hashem said to him, you should leave your father's house. So the Rebbe explains that this is very significant. And this tells us the uniqueness of Avram, what Avram's function, what Avram's accomplishment is. And I'll say it briefly and then we'll discuss it. Avraham himself grew up in an idol worshipper's house, amongst idol worshippers, real pagans. And Avraham, at a very early age, began to realize that this is not the truth. And he started searching for the truth. How do you search for the truth? He investigated various aspects of the natural world, trying to find whether this is the real meaning of the world, this is the real source of the world, this is the real force behind the world. And as he was progressing in this investigation, in this research, he continuously negated, crossed out, so to speak, certain possibilities. And he continued on in trying to find what it is. Until that he realized that actually the real source of the world is not even part of the world itself. As the Medrash says that at first he saw the sun, and there were many people worshiping the sun. So he saw the sun, and he saw that the sun provides all the energy in the world. So he says, oh, maybe the sun is really the base force in the world. Then he crossed that out, canceled that. Which means that he was looking for an explanation for the world and the purpose of the world from within the world itself. And as he was going through all the possibilities, he canceled one after the other out. Until he realized that actually there's only one God that's not visible in the world. That's not really part of the world. That's higher than the world. And this is the real source. So that essentially he came to recognize the presence of Hashem, and as Hashem being the source of the world and the sustenance of the world and so forth, through a process of elimination of investigating in the world itself. Therefore, when Avraham reached that real recognition, reached that realization, he clearly understood that the whole world has to recognize this truth. And he set it as his life's goal to let everybody know about it. And as we know the story, that he broke his father's idols, and he was thrown into fire, he was punished, he was persecuted. He had a very hard time during this time. So he was actually doing everything that a person who had recognized the truth should do. He was Moshe Nefesh, he put his life on the line. He insisted that everybody know the truth, and that everybody know that they have to, that you bow down only to the one God, to the Creator, not to the sun or the moon or anything else. And that you right and wrong, good and bad, have to be judged on the basis of what's right from the perspective of the creator, of this higher creator of the world. Not that which is within the context of the world itself, but something which the creator of the world would want. And yet, at that time, when Avraham had realized all of that on his own, through his own research process, Hashem first then told him, leave your father's home and go to a land that I will show you. What is significant in this? Leave your father's home. The significance of this is that up until that moment, all the realizations that Avraham had were all realizations that he had drawn from his research in life, in the world. And what is the result from that? You understand that since God is the one who created the world, therefore you have to recognize the presence of Hashem, and you have to recognize that the world has a certain quality. It's a creation of Hashem. And therefore you have to act decently, you have to preserve the world, you have to make sure that people live in harmony and in peace, because it's a world that was created by Hashem. This is what's known, we discussed it one time, this is what we call to make the world a better place to live. To make the world recognize what its truth is and what its best status it can possibly be. But Hashem said to him that for him, the beginning of his life starts after that, when he leaves his father's home. What does leaving his father's home mean? It means that although you came to this realization by your experience in the world, that itself is what led you to understand what the truth is. But your real place in the world, Avraham, who was the first Jew and who created this nation, this Jewish nation, his function and his place in the world is not that of making the world a good place or recognizing the truth, its own truth. Avraham's place in the world is to go beyond, outside of the world, and to recognize that his whole presence in the world is not a worldly presence, a good worldly presence, but a godly presence. But he represents Hashem himself in the world. And this is why the Rebbe explains, much of what I said to you is my own fill-in, but the point that the Rebbe says in the Sikha, this is why the first introduction to Avraham in the Torah is when Hashem says to him, leave your father's home. Because everything else that he did before that, and in terms as of being a good person and teaching people and so forth, all that is still within the context of the world. And that's not what Avraham stands for. Avraham's ultimate purpose is to go beyond world itself. And that's why Hashem said to him, the first thing, leave your father's home.
that like the world?
Huh?
His father's home, is that like the world?
That's his world. That's when he started. That's what his basic orientation is. And it's interesting also that when Hashem said to him, leave your father's home, he said to him, and go to the land that I will show you. What would be wrong if Hashem told him, and go to land such as to this and this place? What's significant in this? He said, the land that I will show you. So Rashi, of course, explains a certain comment. But one thing that we can draw from this is that from that moment on, Avraham depended entirely on Hashem. He is going, he doesn't even know where he's going. Hashem is leading him on, and when Hashem will show him where to stop, that's where he'll stop. Hashem will tell him to go, he'll go. There's no longer a worldly perspective, a worldly rationale for what he is doing. He is now entirely, his whole mitzvah, his whole presence is based on Hashem, not on the world. This is what happened as it continues to unfold, that as soon as Abraham came to Eretz Canaan, where Hashem said to him, okay, this is the place, immediately after that there was a famine. There was a famine, there was a hunger, there was no food. So Abraham was forced to go to Mitzrayim. He didn't question it. Oh, did I make a mistake to go here? And why all of a sudden am I being forced to go to Mitzrayim? No question. His whole presence in the world is entirely representing Hashem's direction. And Hashem is entirely in charge. Not only in charge of his whereabouts, but of his very existence. We will talk maybe more about this, but I want to now translate this, what this means to us, what it means to every individual person, and what it means to us on an ongoing basis. We all start off, just like Avraham, we all start off by recognizing the world. The world is an undeniable thing. We all see the world. And then our first question is, what do I do here? What am I supposed to do in this world? How do I live here? How do I find my way? How do I find success and happiness in the world? This is a long process. As a matter of fact, this is an endless process. Because a person goes from stage to stage to stage. But the important thing to recognize is this one principle. Just as a child goes to first grade and learns the Aleph Beis. Learns the Aleph Beis because the Rebbe, the teacher, gives him a candy and tells him, oh, this is an Aleph, this is a Beis. And he absorbs this knowledge. After that first year is over, and he had learned the Aleph Beis, he learned how to read, then he no longer questions the whole Aleph base anymore. He does not need a candy to confirm that this is an Aleph. Now the Aleph becomes a reality in and of itself. It's not an Aleph because my teacher told me it's an Aleph. And if I answer it correctly, I'm going to get a candy. It's an Aleph because it's an Aleph. It becomes a truth, a direct truth. If he does not make that step over, and remains, so to speak, dependent, remains in the questioning, oh, is it an Aleph? Oh, you want me to say it's an Aleph? It's an Aleph. Then he won't be able to go into second grade. In order to go into second grade, he has to acclimate what he has learned in the first grade to such an extent where now it is primary knowledge. What primary knowledge means, it is his personal knowledge. It's not just because he was told that this is so, that's why it's so. It's his direct knowledge. I myself know that this is how it is. And therefore, with this background that I know, and as if it was never a time that I didn't know. I can't even believe that there was a time that I didn't know it, because it's primary knowledge. And now I go on to learn further. And that which I learn further incorporates completely, basically, that which I learned the previous year, where that becomes the basis for the further learning. And this is how he progresses. In other words, there is always, in terms of human progress, there's always a relative progress. In other words, within a certain level, he learns more and more and more until he passes that level completely and he goes over to a different level, and that which was a learning process in the previous level now becomes basic. Because the most obvious thing, it's not even something that he has to substantiate or prove or show. How do you know? That becomes basic knowledge. Now we should ask ourselves a question. How does this really happen? After all, he went to class. It was his teacher that told him that this is an Aleph. He didn't go through the whole world to ask, and everybody agree that this is an Aleph. He didn't ask Hashem, is this an Aleph? His teacher told him it's an Aleph. Maybe some other teacher will say something else. What makes it that he absorbs it in such completeness? But this becomes the basis for further growth and further learning. And of course the answer is that, of course, a child is trusting, and a child, when his Rebbe says to him, his teacher says to him that this is an Aleph, he recognizes, he accepts full-heartedly that his teacher is not telling him something that the teacher himself invented. The teacher is telling him something that is true in an absolute sense. A universal truth. The teacher will not tell him something that this is the way I think, and teach him on that basis. So even though we're talking about a child, the Medrash says that Avraham Avinu was 3 years old when you recognize Hashem. Ben Gimel, Ben Sholish, Hikir Avraham is Beirei. Avraham was 3 years old when you recognize Hashem. Then there's another medrash that says that he was 48 years old when he recognized Hashem. What's 3 or 48? Which one is it? And what does it mean? He recognized Hashem at 3 years old. The point is this. That when Avram began to question the idolatry of his environment, of his father and his brothers and the entire environment where he was, why did he question it? He questioned it not only because it didn't make sense to him that this piece of wood can do anything, because in fact they had all kinds of explanations, all kinds of philosophies associated with Avodah Zarah. The reason that he questioned it is because he had an insight from his neshama that there is an absolute and an all-encompassing truth. He was looking for that. This recognition, we always say children believe what you tell them. But this belief is not because they are fools, but because their neshama recognizes that there is a pure truth. The only Indian that they believe is that they don't suspect that their teacher is telling them something that is not the pure truth. But the Indian that there is such a thing as a pure truth, that they know inherently. And that's why when the teacher tells them this is an aleph, they know that such thing as an aleph, that a truth exists. And when my teacher tells him, surely he's telling me the truth. And therefore they absorb it wholeheartedly, not qualifying, saying, oh, my teacher thinks it's an aleph. That's not the way to learn it. To learn that this is an aleph. I know it because my teacher told me. But ultimately, it goes beyond my teacher telling me it is the absolute truth. This leap over, it's called a leap. Like we say, you graduate first grade, you go to second grade, you go to third grade. This is like a leap. And a person, as a child, goes from grade to grade. The whole setting, the whole method of learning changes slowly. Like the Rambam explains, that at first you teach a child, you bribe him to learn, because he has no idea what learning is all about. How do you bribe him? You give him a candy. But even though you bribed him, you gave him a candy, and therefore he learns the aleph. But he knows that the aleph is a true thing, because he doesn't doubt it. He knows that the truth exists. Then afterwards, you bribe him with something more significant, like give him money. Afterwards, you bribe him with something even more significant to him. You give him covet. You put him up on the board, on the bulletin board, until he graduates this entire process. And he reaches a point where he recognizes that learning is of value in and of itself. He no longer needs to be rewarded, but bribed for it. He steps over completely from one stage to another. And at this point, he recognizes directly that learning is of tremendous value, and he is seeking learning for its own sake. So, everybody knows this process, but I'm calling your attention to this, and we should understand that this changeover is necessary in every person at every stage where he is, regardless of where he is. In the stage, of course, and the changeover And the step over is different for every stage. But it is meaningless to hold on to the process by which you learn something and the reason you came to it, and to hold on to it and say, oh, the only reason I know that's an aleph is because my teacher told me. And the only reason I know that this is good, this is right, is because I tried everything else and I saw that it wasn't good. And this is the only thing that seems to be good. So then you're not identifying the good by its own merits. You're identifying the good on the basis of something negative, something else. Ultimately, the good has to be identified directly. I know this is good. I know this is right. I know this is true. What makes this possible? We don't even perhaps realize it. But in fact, what makes it possible, and this is exactly what happened by Avraham Avinu, what makes it possible is the fact that everyone has this insight, has this sense that the truth is there. And they know what truth means. They can't verbalize it. They cannot necessarily explain it. But when it hits them, they can see what it is. Like we pointed out one time, that when you take a child, a young child, and you learn with him the beginning of the Chumash, a child who has been playing in the street and ball all the time, and you learn with the Chumash, and the Chumash says, Bereshis bara Elokim hashamayim v'haaretz, that the very beginning of everything is that Hashem created the Shamayim v'haaretz. And these words, which are totally revolutionary, it would seem, to the child's experience, never thought of it, never saw the creation. And yet, he can relate to it. He doesn't question it. And the reason for that is because he recognizes that even though everything in his world changes all the time, but there is an underlying truth behind it. And when you tell him Hashem creates the world, it makes sense to him. This is what makes it real. He doesn't question it. I told you this story one time, recently as I recall it. A story that illustrates this point. That was the Rebbe Maharash. Rebbe Maharash was a Tzemach Tzedek's son. That's the fourth Rebbe, fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe. When he was a child, he was a very lively child, and he played with other boys in the courtyard in Lubavitch, in the courtyard of the Tzemach Tzedek's house. Remember the story? Mm-hmm. Remember? And he was playing there, and the game that the boys were devised to play is, there was a tall ladder over there, and they challenged each other how far they would dare climb up on the ladder. And as the boys were going on, each one climbed up a certain distance, a certain height, and then of course he got scared and would come down. One more, one less. Then came Rebbe Maharash's turn. He came up to the ladder, and he climbed the ladder, climbed all the way up. And then he came down. He was the only one who made it all the way up. So the Tzemach Tzedek, his father, was watching this whole thing happening. And he asked him afterwards, how come the other boys couldn't do it and you did it? And he answered, because the other boys would look down. At some point in time, they looked down. When they looked down, their head began to spin, and they had to come down. They got scared. I didn't look back. I continued on. I didn't look back. Therefore, I was able to make it all the way up. I didn't know I have such a perfect lullaby.
I find it riveting. I'm riveted.
What was it that okay, so Rama says, I didn't look back. So now, I want to understand, why was it that the other boys looked down and Marash did not? Is it that they didn't think of the fact that you shouldn't look back? Everybody knows that you don't look back, because if you look back, you'll get scared. It's no secret. Why did they take a Rebbe, so to speak, a person of that caliber, natural caliber, that only he has that power to climb up and not look back? And the answer that I explained was that since the ladder was standing on the ground, so the boys all related to the ground on which the ladder stands as the base. This is what's giving it support. This is what's called the reality of it. This is the solid base. So as they're climbing up, they are still relating. He's going to step up, up, up. What makes him stand up over there? What makes him hold up over there? He is held up over there by the foot of the ladder that's riveted to the ground. So therefore, he is constantly has in mind that he is still connected to the ground. And this is really the basis what's holding him up. So since this is the basis that's holding him up, he is almost compelled to look back and see that he's still connected to the ground. Because as he's walking up, he kind of loses sight of the base of the ground, and he feels very uncomfortable, feels lost in nothingness. He has to look back and see what is it that's holding him up. So it's, as much as he knows that he shouldn't look back, he is compelled to look back. Because that's the base, that's the reality that the whole thing is based on. And that's why they looked back, and they were then forced to come down. Couldn't. Once you look back and you see that you're far, you can't estimate the distance between where you are and the ground. No way can you continue on. The Rebbe, his orientation, it's true that the ladder is standing on the ground, but his whole basic orientation, he had a much more pure view of existence of life. And his basic orientation was, whether the ladder stands on the ground or not, that's a natural phenomenon. But what is holding everything up? The Rebbe, Hashem. He relates directly to Hashem wherever he is. Whether he's on the ground, whether he's on the ladder. Even when he's on the ground, it's not that the ground, he trusts the ground, that the ground is holding him up. He's being held up by Hashem. Just like I said before, the child who knows an aleph, he knows that the aleph is an aleph because Hashem made it, not because his Rebbe told him. So he is not kind of basing, even when he's on the ground, he knows that that the reality of it is not that the ground holding up, but Hashem is holding him up. And therefore, when he's climbing up the ladder, he is never away from his base. He's not compelled. There's nothing compelling him, nothing forcing him to look back and see, am I still close enough to the ground to be able to relate to it? He doesn't need it. Wherever he relates to Hashem. That's why he's able to go up. He was able to not to look down, and therefore he was able to go up. This principle is the inyan that I would like to clarify here. Each one of us, again, this is not exclusively about Shuvah principle. This is everyone. Every person. Like I said before, a child goes to Cheder and learns Aleph base. The only way he can learn Aleph base is if he believes 100% this is an Aleph. And it cannot be based on the fact that his teacher told him. It has to be an absolute Aleph. And in order that it should be an absolute Aleph, he has to have a sense that there's such a thing as absolute truth. So each one of us goes through various stages, various processes that bring him from stage to stage to stage. And every step, every time that we make a step, we have a basis, we have a reason, we have something that gives us support and rationale that says, oh, this is the right way to go. But once we identify, we see the right thing, there is a point in time, there's a point where we have to let go of that which brought us to this and recognize that this is truth in itself. I once also told you this anecdote which illustrates this point. This will maybe wake everybody up. There'll be a little laughter. There was a bocher who was looking for a shidduch, and he was a very gifted, blessed bocher, which means he had absolutely everything going for him. He had very good family establishment. They were comfortable financially. He was gifted. He was learned. He was a good person. He was handsome. He was healthy. Everything. And then the Shadchanim tried to match him up, find him a shidduch, and he would reject everything, everyone that was suggested to him. In every suggestion, he found some kind of some shortcoming, some blemish. Oh, this is not perfect, not perfect. And the Shadchanim just threw up their hands and said, well, we can't find him a shidduch. And they were all anxious to find him a shidduch because it was a wealthy family. If they find him a shidduch, they're going to get rewarded properly. And as much as they worked, everything was rejected. So they came up to the family, to the parents, and they said, there's nothing we can do for your boy. We have an idea for him. The idea is he should go to yeshiva. And he should learn modesty, humility. He should learn anivus. He should learn that a person has to be humble. He'll learn a little humility. Then he'll come back, maybe we'll be able to match him up. So the family said fine. They identified the yeshiva where he should go. They loaded him up with all kinds of goodies, sent him off to yeshiva. He was in yeshiva a year's time. After the year, he comes back. Now he has learned another. He learned humility. Right? So the Shadchanim now come back and start talking to him again about making a shidduch. One thing, another thing, and the bocher says, I don't understand what's going on over here. This shidduchim that you're now suggesting, you suggested a year ago. Why are you coming back with the same thing? I already told you it's no good. So the Chachamim say, what do you mean? Last year, that was before you learned humility, before you were anonymous. But now you learned humility, maybe now it'll be good. So Baruch says, I don't understand you altogether. Last year, I was perfect, except I lacked one thing, humility. And this shidduch was no good. Now, I also have this mila. Not only do I have everything else, but I also have the quality of humility. Now it's going to be good. Now I'm even more perfect than last year. So what is this? What's the analysis? I mean, of course, this is a joke. But the point is, every joke, everything has a teaching. You go to yeshiva to learn anivus. But you can't learn anivus for the purpose of making you more perfect. If you want to learn anivus, you have to be a nonav in its own right. Not to fill in what you're missing, but to actually learn and understand and acquire that quality for its own sake. Otherwise, it's a joke. You've learned nothing. This is true in every person's life. And particularly when you talk about Yiddishkeit, and particularly the opportunity of a yeshiva, because everybody has a background and has a reason why, what compelled them to go and change their lives and to come to learn in yeshiva. But you have to know that you cannot base your progress on that which compels you to come. The progress ultimately has to be, and is measured only by your relating and understanding the very value of what you're learning itself, for its own sake. Not because it takes you away out of the problem that you came from. Then it's not a real thing. The real thing is when the value and the truth of the Eden that you're learning is true in itself. This is just like, Torah is called food. Lechem and bread and water. The person is very hungry. He needs the sensation. Sometimes one little bite takes away the hunger. But that doesn't really give him the help that he is looking for, that he needs. He has to, it's not just the taste of bread. He has to eat it. He has to chew it up. He has to digest it. And it has to become part of him. And then it's going to give him health. Just because it makes him feel better for a moment doesn't mean that this is actually giving him strength and health. And the same thing is in Torah. In Torah, it's not enough that for the moment, I feel that I'm involved in something real. That something real has to be absorbed, has to become and viewed and recognized as something that I can see is the truth itself. Then he becomes life. There's an interesting way of reference. Chochmas HaKabbalah, everybody knows what Kabbalah is. Chassidus, everybody knows Chassidus, Kabbalah. It's interesting that Kabbalah many times is referred to as Chochmas HaEmes. You ever come across this? It's called Chochmas HaEmes, which means the wisdom of the truth. What wisdom is not of the truth? When you learn Torah, it's not the truth. What does Chochmas HaEmes mean? Everything is the truth. So this is not something that I've seen any place written, but surely it is a valid explanation. Whether this is the only explanation, it's a valid explanation. But I think the reason it's called Chochmas Oemes. Chochmas Oemes, the Pshat. Normally when you learn Chochma, and you learn like in piece of Gemara, you learn a Mishnah, a Kasha, a Gemara, a Teretz. Everything that you learn is explained on the basis of some kind of logic. Like for instance, I don't know exactly, you're learning Cloud Godel. What are you learning now in Gemara? What's learning Gemara now? Cloud Godel, Shabbos.
How do they get the
Huh?
how do they get the distinction between the 39 malachas?
Right. Okay. Okay, you're learning Shegeg, Shabbos and Shegeg. Okay. For instance, the 39 malachas, that's a very simple, superficial exposition of it. The 39 malachas. How do we know the 39 malachas?
Because when they are given from Hashem by Sinai, when they given when Moshe was in Sinai.
No, but how do we know the 39 malachas are also on Shabbos?
From the action of the Bet HaMikdash.
Or from the Mishkan. Because this is what took place in the Mishkan. All malachas that were involved. How do we know? Because the Torah says you should keep Shabbos and build the Mishkan. So we know that everything that is involved in building the Mishkan is also on Shabbos. And the Chachamim have identified 39 different things that were involved in building the Mishkan. And this is the 39 malachas. Okay. In other words, we are not at this point identifying the 39 malachas in themselves. Oh, I could see this is a malacha. On the contrary, logically, what we would think is that many of these malachas are not malachas, and to pick up a heavy burden from one end of the room, bring it to another end of the room is a malacha. But the Torah says no. That's not a malacha. To take a handkerchief out from the house into the street is awesome. And to carry a ton of bricks from one end of the room to another is not a malacha. Because this is what we learn out from the Mishkan. Or some other rationale. In each one of these cases, whatever the explanation and the rationale is, there is a rationale for it. There is a reason why we say so. It isn't that I say this statement, and I right away see it's true. Chochmas HaKabbalah. Kabbalah, the Zohar says in Kabbalah there is no kashas, there's no tirutzim, there's no debating. Because Chochmas HaKabbalah is called Chochmas Oemes. The minute there's a statement, the truth of it emanates from itself. It doesn't need substantiation. It doesn't have substantiation, it doesn't need substantiation. It's true in itself. How can a person in his seichel, that's why it's a little bit more difficult to learn, how can a person in seichel needs proof, needs substantiation, needs reason? It is because, as I explained, that in our mind, in our seichel, there is a neshama. Excuse me. The neshama is what shines through our mind. And the neshama knows the truth. And when we learn something that's true, we can readily recognize it. That's what's called Chochmas Oemes. It's true in itself. It's true not because of any proofs, but it's true in itself. it is important that we understand that the real extent of learning Torah, a real extent of relating to Yiddishkeit, relating to Torah, no matter what logic, what reason brings a person to it, but ultimately, just like Avraham Avinu, ultimately one has to pass beyond that which brought him to it, and the reason why he came to it, and he has to recognize the truth of it directly. Just like a child knows that an aleph is an aleph, and he doesn't even remember who told him that. And it's not true because somebody told him, because he knows it's true. The same way is the truth of Torah, ultimately, to everyone, regardless of where he started. And this is why it's important that we understand that we have to allow ourselves to make these leaps, what's called, going over, graduating from the questioning stage to the knowledge state. Questioning state is when I'm still looking for proofs, looking for reasoning. Knowledge stage is when my mind opens up and I understand what I'm learning. I see it's true directly. Really, only then is when we really relate to Torah. This is when we really become one with it. And this is the principle of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu accomplished enormous accomplishments. Avraham Avinu was 75 years old at the time when Hashem told him to leave his father's house. At the age of 3, he started his work. So he had 72 years behind him in continuous effort and accomplishment. And his real birth is at the time when Hashem told him to leave his father's house. That's when he took this leap. And all the various nisyanos, all the various trials and tribulations that he went through before, these were all from what's called from a worldly context. It wasn't Avraham in the true sense. It wasn't Avraham, the father of the Jewish nation. All his tests began from this point on. To leave his father's house, then to have to go down to Mitzrayim, then to go and have to fight the Molochim, the 5 kings, the 4 kings, which I'm sure you'll learn this week and so forth. This experience that one has like the Rambam says, that ultimately a person, a Chacham, should do mitzvahs not because of any benefit, of any reward, because this is the right way to live, this is the most pleasant way to live in the world, whatever it is, or even benefit, reward from Olam Haba. But a person has to do Torah mitzvahs because it's true. And the way the Rambam expresses it, Ha'emes mipnei shehu emes. The truth, just because it's true. In order to recognize the truth, because it's true, one has to really absorb, has to really relate to it and see there's such thing as truth, which is only possible if one's mind opens up and he sees, he can relate it to the truth as he identifies truth. then, at whatever level it is, then the Torah really begins to give him life. Just like food gives a person sustenance, the Torah that a person learns gives his neshama sustenance. It gives him spiritual strength, mental strength and emotional strength. Where he's not fazed by anything in the world. He can walk on solid ground, because he's not even walking on the ground. He's walking on the ground that Hashem provides for him. He doesn't doubt any step of it in his life. Like Avraham Avinu, when he had to leave Eretz Canaan to go to Mitzrayim because of his famine, and he knew Mitzrayim was a dangerous place, he went. Why? Because wherever he goes, wherever he is, his security is not by the place where he is, but by the Meibush. And therefore it makes no difference if Mitzrayim is in Mitzrayim. Then subsequently there was this war where Lot was captured and Avram had to go and fight 4 mighty kings. He went. And that's what I have to do. You know what I have to do? Because his security is not based on logic, it's based on nature. And this is what Hashem has to do. That happens even in a minuscule, even in a small quality. It happens when one recognizes a sense of truth in the Torah. That's when one overcomes all his obstacles. And this is why I brought you the story from Amir Marash. Don't look back. Don't try to look back. How far am I from where I started? Can I still orient myself with that place where I started from? That's not the basis. The place where you started from, that's not the basis of your life. The basis of your life is the truth of the Torah. And looking back is what makes one, as for Shalom, fall down the ladder. To know that wherever you go, the Rebbe said is there, Hashem is there, that is what carries you through. To recognize the truth right here, not the truth that you experience in the outside. This is what gives you the strength, and this is what enables all of us to face our lives in the world. Because the challenges of life, no matter what you plan, no matter what one thinks, the challenges of life cannot be predicted. Cannot be predicted. When you go into life, you have to be able to respond and accept anything that comes your way. And you have to have the strength for it. And the strength for it is to recognize that whatever comes my way, there's a truth to it. There's a Rebbe behind it, with Hashem, and therefore I can face it. If I think that my base is just a narrow base, the earth that supports my ladder, and anything else I can't relate to, it can't go very far. It shakes our boat very quickly. This is why it's necessary that when you learn, we delve with our whole heart and mind into it. Not we learn just superficially. We get into it. We repeat it as many times as needed, so that it stays in our mind. Just like a child, when he learns the Aleph, ultimately he knows the Aleph without having to think about it. That's when he knows it. Any amount of this knowledge that it becomes really ours, and so to speak, the truth itself, that is the level of strength that we get from it. So, what we always do, I'd like to wish you Lachem Hatzlocha. It's a new beginning of a new year. Should be Matzliach, and you should absorb everything clearly. Should give you real strength in life. I would like to ask you to give it over to our Russian speaking Talmidim. Okay. So I would like to